Welcome new and old friends to day 3 of our Halloween week. Today is paranormal/ghost stories for you. I know I'm breaking the normal one day and then one night norm, but I want to end this week, aka day 4, with some night stories I have for you. So I hope you'll forgive me. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. All of this truly helps the channel a lot. Now, with all that being said, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I think something tried to lure me into the woods tonight. By Spooky Penguin. I can't sleep at all since this happened, and I'm honestly not sure who else to share this with because I think I'll sound crazy. But I have to get this out because it's been running through my head, and I'm so chilled and mortified. I live on a big piece of sort of small farmland with 2 homes, the house my husband and I live in and the house that is owned by his grandparents, a short walk distance away. We have a lot of woods surrounding our land, and we get a lot of woodland animals that come through our yard a lot. It's one thing I really love about living here. There's a groundhog family I've gotten to watch grow up that live by one of our sheds that mind their own business, and don't bother any of the small crops my husband's Nana grows. Anyway, our dogs kind of just know the territory and walk around freely between the 2 houses in the large field. I guess you could call them farm dogs, but they don't really do anything. My dog is a 3-legged, 15-year-old Chihuahua that manages to get around better than me somehow, and Nana's a really fat beagle who would lick you to death. We're also dog-sitting my mother-in-law's big dog for 4th of July weekend since she's going to be somewhere with a lot of fireworks. He really doesn't like them, and he's familiar with our home. So last night I came out of the bathroom and the big dog started freaking out, like whining, howling, kind of stomping his feet like he wanted to show me something, if that makes sense. This isn't really unusual for him because he gets pretty mouthy when he wants to go outside, so I started going towards the door, which then he started gesturing with his head towards. So I opened the wooden door before our screen door, and he just froze in our kitchen like a statue. My dog then came up behind him and froze too. They both stared directly at me and turned their heads towards the door in sync like they were gesturing for me to go outside. It was so uniform. I don't know how to describe it. Like, it just felt so wrong for them to do. But at the same time, I assumed maybe there was a skunk outside or something. I went out onto the porch to see our grand neighbor's dog sitting happily on our porch, which made me relax a little. There was a very distant sound of fireworks, so I thought maybe that's what the dogs were so on edge about. Then the fat beagle on the porch did the same thing, looked at me, nodded his head towards the woods like a suggestion. I noticed he was sitting uncharismatically still and wasn't panting or snorting like he usually does. I walked to the edge of the porch and looked around for a bit. Eventually my eyes landed at this one spot, a perfect hole between the trees that allowed me to stare back deeper into the woods a little bit. And in that spot, I saw a pair of eyes open and blink at me. The rest is kind of a haze. I just remember thinking you need to go to the woods over and over again, while urging myself not to do it, like I was having a battle with a rope pulling me. I suddenly looked like there was grass that had laid perfectly for me to walk on, like I could just point out a spot that had been tread on by feet before. The best way I could describe it is like that one Joti Ito story about the fault where people were being lured into their holes. It was like there was a path made for me to walk to this pair of white eyes staring at me from the woods. My husband knows something was amiss. I guess because he heard the door open and wasn't sure where it was. I always tell him when I go outside to read/sit on the porch for a while. And I just kind of heard him behind me go, "What are you doing?" I remember saying, "I'm just looking." I specifically remember saying that. I would bet money on that those are the words that left my mouth. My husband kinda started getting worried and started guiding me inside, but I remember saying, "I'm just looking." He finally ushered me inside and shut the door, turned around wide-eyed and kinda questioned, "You do not need to go into the woods?" I was really confused. From what I remember, from his perspective, what he should have seen was me standing on the porch staring into the woods. I never mentioned anything about walking out there, just had the sensation that I should move. It was then he told me that apparently I kept looking out like I was in a trance, saying different variations of, "I need to walk out into the woods for a bit." I have no recollection of this at all. I've had weird things happen to me before, but this truly fills me with dread. I do not understand what happened, and I'm honestly really frightened about any of us going outside alone for a bit. I really, really feel like there's something trying to lure us into the woods or something. The disease I inherited meant that soon I wouldn't even recognize the members of my own family. Running and stumbling through the woods as the full moon steadily rises, I pray that I can get far enough away from them. A Red Dot in My Parents' Backyard by Anonymoose. This happened around 2003 in my parents' home. They had a big backyard that ended in a small forest. Back then, the neighborhood was very isolated, so it was a few streets and all surrounded by forest. One night, a red light dot appeared in the backyard. We saw it when we were on our front porch, and our cousin was in the alley to the right of the house, looking at the dark backyard. We didn't dare go check because it was super dark and we were scared kids, but we called the adults and they saw it too. The light was about 150 meters from our house. It looked as if it was on ground and would slowly lift up a little and go back down. It stayed there for the whole night. My parents were also confused and scared to go check. They joked about it being un enterrero. There were legends about a burial place where you see a light and it leads you to find gold, the light being the spirits of who were buried. I would think it was a firefly, but I was used to seeing those and they would glow green and yellowish, not like this strong red. It also wouldn't make any sense for a bug to stay in the same place for the whole night and just hover slowly up and down in the same place. That's what we decided we wanted to believe though, that it was somehow a super red bright firefly walking up and down a small plant. We went to check the next day in the morning and there was nothing that could have caused this. The area where we thought it was didn't have bushes or anything. It was a clear patch and we didn't see anything. Then it appeared again the next night. My parents were baffled. I remember several people from the neighborhood and other relatives that didn't live there came to see it, all coming up with theories. My little cousin and I decided to go check, and after we started walking down the alley, an owl scared us and we ran back for our lives. I remember a teenager also walked down there but getting too scared to continue. I think it may have appeared a night or two more until it didn't anymore, and we never got an explanation. There were no lights in the backyard, and there are no houses to the side that could maybe cause the light to reflect on something shiny in the ground. If you ask me today what it looked like those red lights that the cyclists use on their bikes, but dimmer. At the time, though, I had nothing to compare it with. Our neighborhood was poor. People didn't have devices that emitted light like they do today, where it could be anything. Someone with a small radio, phone, laser light, or something. I still can't figure out what it was, but I just have to let it go every time I remember. My first wife fell to her death going skydiving, and it was years until my next marriage. My second wife died from strangulation, because I couldn't convince her to go skydiving with me. The Vengeful Husband by cornmeal-jo. This particular encounter with the paranormal is what I considered mid-grade compared to some of my other run-ins with the deceased. It has all the hallmarks of a stereotypical ghost encounter that I myself might have dismissed as either boring or unbelievable had it not happened to me. And while it was certainly frightening at the time, I've come to the view that it was a very obnoxious interaction in hindsight. In fact, I feel mildly aggravated recounting it. The story begins after I had begun dating another woman who I'll call Stacy. Stacy lived in a double-wide in a large but relatively nice trailer park with her 2 Jack Russells, Luna and Zoe. It wasn't always that way though. Just a year prior, she had lost her husband Mike to cancer. By the time we met, she got into the place where she was ready to move on with her life and asked me to move in with her after just 2 months of us dating. Looking back now, that was too soon. But at the time, I was living at the VA after falling on hard times and losing my house, so the offer was too good to refuse. Now, it just so happened that my moving in coincided with the anniversary of Mike's death by 5 days, with the occurrences intensifying the closer it got to him breathing his last breath just a year before. It was around 10 p.m. and was getting sleepy, so I decided to hit the hay while Stacy finished watching her show out in the living room. It wasn't long after my head hit the pillow that I began to drift off. The euphoric feeling of being both awake and asleep at the same time was interrupted by the realization that I was no longer alone, with the culprit standing directly over me or otherwise very close. I jolted myself awake the second I felt this sensation and looked around the darkened room, seeing nothing but still feeling off. I lay back down and tried to ignore the feeling, but then the tapping began. Tap, tap, tap. At first I thought it might be melting snow or ice dripping from the roof and onto the corner of the trailer. It was February after all. But then the feeling of dread coursed through my body, coupled with the sensation of not being alone once again. It was around that time that I realized I was experiencing the call is coming from inside the house type of situation. That is to say, the tapping was coming from the corner of the room and not outside. Despite this revelation, I was determined to tough it out and hope that this noise would go away. This only seemed to make things worse because the longer I stayed, the louder the tapping got and the more unwelcoming and afraid I became. Every so often, I would open my eyes just a smidge to see if there was some menacing ghost staying over me, and every time, there was nothing, at least at first. I repeated this demented game of hide-and-go-seek roughly 5 times with nothing ever showing itself. It wasn't until the 6th peek that I saw a dark mass begin to appear in the same corner that the knocking was coming from. I practically launched myself out of the bed so quickly and effectively that I probably could have placed at least second in some Olympic event and bolted out to the living room to tell Stacy what happened. Much to my surprise, she believed me. but all she really could say was, "Oh yeah, Mike's probably not happy that you're sleeping on his side of the bed." The next night proved to be just as eventful as the last. Stacy and I were in the living room watching TV and eating leftover Chinese food, while the two dogs were sleeping next to us on the couch. Suddenly there was 3 heavy knocks on the adjacent front door. Bam, bam, bam. Luna and Zoe went into bark mode. Stacy and I looked at each other. Who the hell was knocking at a door at 11 p.m.? Stacy reasoned that as someone who was a badass army chick, I was the one that should go check to see who was outside. Of course, I argued that it was her house and made up some ethical traditional dictate that she was the one to go instead. Eventually, logic prevailed, and I bravely undid the locks before nearly ripping the doors off the hinges, ready to confront the asshole who intruded us so late. But there was no one to bitch out. Not even a single neighbor letting their dog out to pee. Closing and bolting the door, we both agreed that there was no way a person could avoid the large, rickety front porch. The damn thing practically rattled the whole inside floor when someone walked up on it. Finally, the anniversary of Mike's death arrived. Stacy chose that day to go through some of the things in his office to either throw away or keep. So naturally, there was some activity. Knocks were heard throughout the house whenever she threw something away, along with a few small objects being thrown or knocked over. Overall, nothing too catastrophic. At least not until that night when I went to bed alone and felt the same menacing presence staying over me like 2 days prior. By this point, I was kind of fed up by Mike's antics and told him as much out loud. Obviously, he didn't like that too much, because the next thing I heard and felt was a loud bang on the headboard, followed by having the comforter being ripped off me. Once again, I hauled ass out into the living room and eventually fell asleep next to Stacy while watching a movie. Things kinda calmed down after that night. Every so often there'd be a loud noise or the feeling of being watched by someone who was severely pissed. This went on until Stacy and I separated 3 months later on bad terms. I had no idea if Mike still haunts that trailer, but Stacy really ought to warn future partners that her deceased husband might terrorize them too. Or, at the very least, piss them off. My father mocked me and threw away my makeup, deciding that we would go hunting in the woods so I could man up. I must say, taking a son who hates him in the middle of nowhere and then teaching him how to use a rifle wasn't his brightest idea. It's been 12 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. By Headless. Recently came across this sub and decided to share my story in hopes that there might be people here with more knowledge or experience on this topic that could help me make sense of what happened to me. I've shared my story with my friends and family, but people never have much to add, just something along the lines of, "That's crazy." When I was 19, my uncle asked me to stay with him for the summer. He had just bought a home in rural Pennsylvania, farmland out in the Amish country. The house and property were pretty run down, so he was paying me to stay with him for the summer and work on fixing things up. It was a large old home and had 2 staircases, one small one in the back part of the house that led directly to his bedroom, and then the main staircase by the front door that led to the other bedrooms. Being a teenager, I used to stay up downstairs watching TV after he'd gone to bed. After a few weeks, I started to get weird feelings being alone at night. I would just start to feel like there was someone else downstairs. Sometimes I would think I heard someone whispering. I would just get slightly paranoid and find myself glancing the direction of the adjacent sitting room that had nothing but a couple of chairs. I chopped it up to the fact that this was an unfamiliar house and that it gets incredibly dark out there in the middle of nowhere. As time went on, my uncomfortable/scared feelings started to escalate. It's hard to explain, but I had that uncanny feeling of being watched when I was alone at night. There were times when I would get up and go into the other rooms downstairs and turn on the lights just to look and make myself feel better. I eventually just stopped staying up downstairs and would just go up to my room and read. Not long after that, the sense of someone else being present began to follow me into my room, which hadn't been the case before. It was like one moment everything was normal and I was happily reading or lying in bed. And then I would get this weighty feeling of something entering the room and watching me. I just tried to ignore it and would eventually fall asleep. Things continued to escalate. The presence started to follow me into my room virtually every night. I would immediately notice because there would be this weighty change in the feeling of the room, and the temperature also seemed to get colder. I would lie in bed at night and hear whispers or breathing in the room. I started to sleep with the lights on. The next part is the point in the story that the title of the post is alluding to. One night I was laying on my bed with the lights on, reading. I was pretty tired from the work we did that day and was falling asleep earlier than usual. Everything was normal in the room at this point, and I felt relieved because I just wanted to get a good night's sleep. I set my book down and drifted to sleep. Sometime later, I started to be awakened by a strange sound. Lying there with my eyes closed, I could hear something that sounded like rubbing. It wasn't loud, but it was just this constant, faint rubbing sound coming from nearby. I regained consciousness enough to think, "What is that?" and come to, opening my eyes. I looked down towards my chest. I had been sleeping on my back and found my left hand extended straight up into the air, reaching towards the ceiling. The rubbing sound was my own fingers. They were being played with? My fingers were being bent and manipulated, and the sound was the skin of my fingers rubbing against each other. Directly above my hand was what I can only describe as a black mist/fog, maybe 2.5 or 3 feet wide. Having just woken up, what was happening did not immediately register. I lay there just staring at my hand in the mist for a few seconds, confused. I think this was compounded by the fact that I couldn't feel my hand, so it almost seemed like it wasn't happening to me. Then, like a bolt of lightning, a jolt of pure terror shot through my entire body. I never felt terror before. I'd been afraid in my life, but I never knew what terror was until this moment. I think horror movies actually do a pretty good job of recreating how it feels, with the disorienting camera angle and the music, like the famous score from Psycho. I yanked my arm back and sprang back like a cornered animal, sitting up at the head of the bed. My back and arms pinned up against the wall as I stared at the mist. It just slowly faded away, and then it was gone. That's my experience. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night, replaying it over and over in my head. Did that actually happen? Was I dreaming? I must have been dreaming. But I'm sitting here awake. The sheets kicked off of my bed from when I sprang back. It happened so clearly. No, it was real. This really happened. But it couldn't have. I decided to tell my uncle the next day. I had mentioned previously that I got creeped out hanging out downstairs alone. But that was the extent of what he knew up to this point. He actually believed me, or pretended to, and said that he got weird feelings in the house at times as well. He also told me that the previous owner had been an elderly man that passed away. At this point, I only had a couple more weeks left at his place before I needed to head home to get ready for the next year of college. I tried to stick it out, but after 2 entirely sleepless nights, I told him I was heading home early and left. He ended up moving for work reasons a couple years later, and I did visit him once at that house for a family Thanksgiving and did not sleep there. I know this is an incredibly long post, and if you made it this far, thank you. People who have had experiences or have knowledge on the topic, do you have any thoughts? I never had any paranormal experiences before this, and didn't really think about ghosts or whether they are real or not. I certainly never thought they'd be able to physically interact with me. As you can probably guess, I'm a firm believer now, but have not had any other experiences and hope not to. My husband and the rest of his fishing crew had been missing for a few weeks when a strange woman appeared at my door. With a grin on her disturbing, fish-eyed face, the woman shoved a package into my hands, and when I opened it, I came face to face with my husband's bloated, severed head. Something woke me up at 4 a.m., and it might be related to several events that happened before. By NotMikeTheNoscoper. This event happened in the middle of the last half of last year, 2022, and in the middle of the first half of this year, 2023. Background story. I, Mike, am a student in Polytechnic of Port Dickson, Malaysia. I was living in a house with 6 classmates in a nearby, somewhat remote small town of Pasir Panjang in the same district. We are used to commuting to our college using several roads with a stretch of about 10 kilometers which runs in the middle of the forest/oil palm plantation. The roads had no road lights. We depended on our high beams when we were using the roads at night because we literally could not see anything beyond 20 meters at night. I have a bike which I use to commute from place to place, just like the other 5 of my classmates. One guy had a car which we often go carpooling in. Now, on to the first story, 2022. Me and my 5 mates went out to eat at night after a hiking trip to a nearby hiking spot on the weekend, leaving one guy, let's call him Chad, at home because he was sleeping. While we were returning home from eating outside, we received a text in the group chat that we made for us. It was from my friend back home saying something like, "What time will you come home? I felt lonely in this house because Mike is still sleeping in his room." It was weird because I was in the car with the rest of the housemates, so I replied, "I'm not in the house, bro. I went with them." He went silent after that until we reached home. After reaching home, we opened the door and saw him crouching in the fetal position by the staircase in the living room with a scared expression on his face. We all were about to ask what's wrong, but he told us what happened. He said he saw me sleeping on the floor in my room, feet facing the door with the lights and fan off. He didn't think anything about it at first until he got my message in the group chat. He realized that it was not me that he saw, and his stomach dropped upon reading my message. He even went to check my room again to make sure someone was there, but nobody was. We were joking around about him, and I even knocked on my room's door to let myself know that I was going in. We didn't take him too seriously, just to calm his nerves down. We don't have trouble sleeping that night, but I'm sure he didn't get any sleep. A few weeks go on, and one day when I was downstairs with one of my housemates doing assignments while waiting for my other housemates to arrive from eating outside, I noticed someone walking barefoot outside the gate. The gate was open, so I had to look and analyze the person walking. It made footstep sounds, but something felt off. So I went over to have a look. I opened my door and walked to the gate to see, but the man was gone. I was curious, so I walked the same direction so I saw it walking and looked along each road at about a 4-way intersection in our neighborhood. The person was gone. It was really quick judging from the time it took me to reach outside the gate, 10 seconds. I went back inside to tell my housemate, who's doing assignments, about what just happened. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm riding my motorcycle alone through the dark road after eating outside with my mates. This time, I'm the only one not in the car with them. Midway, there was an intersection which was the only lit up part of the road, and I was going to switch lanes. So I looked at my side mirror to make sure that there was no cars behind me so that I could safely merge. But I noticed a reflection of a person in white cloth on my back seat waving in the wind. I was wearing all black at the time. I didn't think much of it because I'm more concentrated on my safety on the dark road. As I went deeper into the road, the reflection became darker and darker due to the absence of light in the area, so I kept on riding home without much thought put into it. But as I arrived home, I parked my bike outside the gate and looked at my bike from afar. I didn't want to open the gate because I didn't want anything to follow me to come inside with me. So I waited for my friends to arrive before making a decision. I told it to go away and don't follow me. But I don't know if it worked. I was having cold sweats and chills at the time. As my friends arrived, Chad asked me, "What's wrong?" I told him everything that happened, like this story above. He told me to calm down and advised me to tell it to go away and don't bother us. I just did that and went inside like normal. No nightmares, no disturbances that night. So I believe it was all fine. Ever since that day, I'm getting more and more paranoid when riding my bike at night. I notice this particular smell when riding. It smells like flowers, but it's unpleasant. Feels like you're smelling someone's perfume up close. But the smell does not come every time I went through that road though. Another day, I went through another road that leads to our home. It's been a couple weeks since I last smelled that fragrance. Until that moment, I felt like something was wrong, and I said out loud in my full-faced helmet, "Do not follow me." However, at that moment, I didn't see anything behind me in my side mirror. It was getting annoying at that point. I don't even feel scared of it nor threatened. It just feels like you're being played with. We then went on our semester break, which I attended a camp for a month and returned back to the same house for the next semester. We didn't have any encounters for a good couple of months from the beginning of that semester, until one day I was sleeping downstairs in the living room and was woken up by a voice that seemed to be mimicking the voice of Chad. Wake up, Mike, Mike." I thought something bad had happened, so I opened my eyes, but to my vision, the whole living room is dark, with the exception of our porch light shining through. I did see someone tall standing over me, but I thought it was Chad who woke me up. So I asked him, "What's wrong?" But I didn't get a reply. I then looked at the thing standing over me to see if it was really him. It was really tall, dark, but I couldn't see a face since it was so dark, and I just had woken up from sleep. I then realized something is off by the unusual length of delay in getting a response. So I told it, "Don't fucking bother me, I'm sleeping." Then rolled to my right and closed my eyes. I then heard footsteps at the staircase. It did not sound like someone going back up to the room, but instead the footsteps sounded like it was going up and down the stairs multiple times. I got annoyed by this and looked at the staircase, with the intention to yell at whoever was playing on the staircase. But there was nobody there. But the sound of the footsteps were still there and continued for about 5 more minutes. Then my friend's watch alarm sounded, which then I knew what time it was. That watch shone 5 a.m., so this interaction happened around 4 a.m. plus. I told my housemates everything that morning. To this day, I do not know what these entities were that were hitchhiking right behind me. The smell, the tall figure calling my name and waking me up. All I know is what I saw, heard, smelled, and felt. Might need to taste them to have a complete experience of the five senses. Feel free to speculate what these entities could be that I encountered, or how it might or might not be related. My best friend and I promised that if we were both single by the age of 37, we would just marry each other. Just 3 more years, I mumbled to myself as I stared at her most recent suitor. His untimely disappearance will certainly strengthen her in my relationship. And with that, our time together is coming to an end. I really hope you enjoyed these stories as always, and would like to thank the writers who let me read their stories. Some of these gave me chills as I read them. Being lured into the woods by something. The ghost of a husband that won't let his wife find anyone else. And something coming after you for wanting to help people. And one of the reasons I truly love stories is hearing such different things I wouldn't think of, or things that give me chills, whether they're true or fiction. And I really hope you guys feel the same about it, and of course, everyone stays safe. Now, if you like these stories, please hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, please subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. Also, I would love if you share with anyone who might enjoy this content. Last but never least, leave me a comment and put in ghostly night so I know you got this far. If you'd like to help in other ways like these lovely people on screen, I do have Patreon and YouTube memberships where you get early access. And if you'd like to do just a one-time donation, PayPal and buy me a coffee. All the links, including the ones to my socials and website, are in the description box down below. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. It really means the world to me. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.